Quake is one of the keystone arena FPS franchises of all gaming history. It's also a franchise that has been severely neglected by its developers for ages, but the Quake franchise is seemingly an icon of the arena FPS genre. Its frantic, fast-paced, and nearly heart-pumping gameplay has inspired other arena FPS games as well. But what makes Quake great? Well, one of the pillar stones of Quake's genius game design is its level design alone, especially on the multiplayer arena level design, for keeping you constantly ever on the move, taking advantage of its own movement technology. This is why techniques like not just rocket jumping or similar, but also strafe jumping or bunny hopping are prevalent in these types of games, keeping you to a certain speed, velocity, and momentum, especially when trying to reach from point A to point B effectively. This tactic in arena FPS games is commonly known as map control, where not only you need to know the layout and item placements of each map, but also how to navigate effectively the map itself, so you can have a clear strategic advantage over your opponent. But in order to explain how this has evolved in the span of all main Quake games, that is Quake 1, 2, 3 Arena, Live 4, and Quake Champions, but how this affects that same map control of these maps, we will look at a very specific map number, DM6, or rather commonly known as Q3DM6, the Campgrounds, a very popular Quake map by any standards. This very map has been immensely featured in common esports tournaments for Quake, and we'll use it as a benchmark to see how the game has evolved, how its audience has evolved, and how does it impact its strategic gameplay. But before any of that, I'd like to honestly preface this by saying that getting these games costs a good chunk of money out of my pocket. Good lord, Quake 4 took not just a sleepless night figuring out how to make it run properly on Windows 11, but also took nearly $20 out of my own money. And honestly, I wish I had more at our disposal. Usually I like to thank you for the immense support our most recent videos got in here. Surprisingly enough, it has led to a solid subscriber growth never seen in ages on this channel. I can't thank you enough for that. But you know what will we be better? If some of you went through the extra mile and pledged at least $5 a month at becomeagoon.today at the Goon Fund. If you're watching this video earlier than when it's being published on YouTube itself, that means you're already there, good job. But if you aren't there yet, this is one of the main perks of becoming a supporter at the Goon Fund at becomeagoon.today. You can watch main video releases at most a week early, and pretty much more than that as well. So if you want to go further and support the channel financially, because we don't usually like taking dodgy sponsorships or anything to keep the channel afloat, go to becomeagoon.today right now. Your continued support keeps the lights on for this channel. Alright, where was I? Ah yes, Quake. I can't use the original soundtrack here because of content ID. Thanks for nothing, Trent Reznor. In 1996, the original Quake shook the gaming world by storm. And we're not supposed to call these games Doom clones anymore. They're now first-person shooters, unless it took a while to figure that out. Quake did innovate with the arrival of 3D accelerated PC gaming on the FPS genre, and long gone is the era of the 2.5D of Doom and Duke Nukem 3D. It's funny because there's even, like I said before, a tiny bit of Quake's DNA into nearly every game existing today. Even Call of Duty is a far cousin of the id-Tech engine of Quake, like Doom Eternal or even Half-Life Alyx. The OG Quake has its own particularities though, especially in the terms of the movement technology or how the players move. In the original Quake, there's a heavy prevalence of bunny hopping, a movement technique which consists of repeatedly jumping forward to gain speed. This makes traversing areas of maps a tad bit easier to do, granted that you have the skill to do so, because it helps effectively reach from point A to point B more effectively, and this is especially useful in deathmatch gameplay in multiplayer Quake. Before we move to describe how DM6 is in Quake 1 though, a few notes. I will refer constantly to items like the heavy armor, the mega health, and power-ups as such, and by power-ups I will mostly mean stuff like the quad damage or the protection power-ups you'll find in deathmatch. This is just for the sake of better understanding some context of our gameplay. That being said, do the Campgrounds exist in Quake 1? Nope. DM6 instead is a weird map called the Dark Place, which is a weird abomination of a deathmatch map. Looking at the aesthetic of the map, I get that the Quake N1 engine is as archaic as 1996 standards of gaming, but it just looks flat and burly brown. It feels like one of those amateur deathmatch maps they were making Doom 2. Leaving the aesthetics alone, I think this map leaves a lot to be desired in terms of gameplay. What I seem to understand it is about the usual navigation through the map is cyclical in the sense that it resembles a merry-go-round shaped like a Mobius strip. But even then, the rooms don't really stand out from each other for how bland and brown they are. The Mega Health is stuck in the small room that you can access through one of the portals, and it looks like a bit of a dead end for half of it. The weapons are randomly scattered all around the place, regardless of how much impact they make in the gameplay, and there are these spawning holes where players spawn in which can even make you stuck in a dead end if you get in them, which is dangerously a newbie trap for anybody since they contain nothing useful. I think this is mostly because id Software was very new into designing arena levels for multiplayer, and there wasn't really much of a standard when it comes to arena level design by that time, at least not until Quake 3 Arena and Unreal Tournament came by. But you'll notice that Quake didn't quite figure it out in terms of level design until a while, and it is clearly more evident with the next Quake installment. So by now you can start noticing patterns with these Quake games. The bunny hopping, for instance, has been sacrificed in Quake 2 for strafe jumping, and there was a lot of compromises in the sequel regarding the original. Rocket jumping, for instance, is more punishing in Quake 2. In fact, it is the most punishing rocket jumps in all of the Quake franchises by far. So it seemed like id Software did seem to initially discourage rocket jumping in Deathmatch on Quake 2. And we arrive at DM6 in Quake 2, or Q2 DM6 to be more precise. Will this be definitely the camping grounds? Nope, just a lava tomb. What a convenient name if it wasn't for my trauma with Claustrophobopoulos in Quake 1. This map is criminal. It's labyrinthic, most of it is covered by lava pits, and it is a way harder map to maneuver in than other Quake instances. I mean, at least in Quake 3's bottomless pits, you know you're gonna die, but here it teases you with the idea that you can get out of lava pits and survive, and I hate it. There's this wheel of doom where you can slip off if you don't jump off to catch the railgun or the grenade launcher and fall into lava. He spatly placed a set of stairs next to our narrow ledge for some reason, and even death traps everywhere, like the slope that constantly opens up and closes repeatedly, it seems. You set a little platform too. You can jump there if you're lucky enough to not land in lava and get in the hole and get the quad damage. Imagine how absurd that is for a newbie trap unless you know exactly how the map plays. You're either way bound to make a leap of faith if you fall into that trap and not land at a platform where to get the frigging quad damage. Similarly, the BFG is the most powerful weapon in the game, and to reach this BFG, the game tells you you gotta jump all those 3 platforms that sink into lava when stepped on. Well, look at this then. I just got the BFG by rocket jumping without all that bullshit. You're discouraged from rocket jumping because of how punishing to your health it is, and yet the game tells you can rocket jump to get the most fucking powerful weapon in the whole fucking game. I thought id Software figured out the arena map standard by now. But okay, surely those 2 games didn't quite get there yet. Surely Quake 3 Arena might be a palate cleanser by now. At some point in Quake history, we settled ourselves that Quake 3 Arena was going to be the go-to standard for Quake tier arena FPS games. And I say this because finally we have Q3 DM6, the camping grounds. This map is the GOAT. It should be the standard going forward. It is the benchmark for everything I mean in this video, and the subsequent Quake games afterwards. For starters, Q3DM6's tech-gothic aesthetic sets it apart from the aesthetics of the previous two Quake games. It has distinctive aesthetics such as the satanic pentagram in the central hub, the torn banners in the hallways, or these little details like torn apart floors with static that indicate where the map items spawn. It's like what if Lovecraft had a baby with the author of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. He's basically that type of thing, and it's pretty much a recurrent aesthetic theme in Quake 3 Arena. But how does the map play? Quite simple. This map and its subsequent variations, not just in Quake 3, but in following Quake games, has three main key areas where the main action occurs. The long hallway where the balcony with the railgun and the armor are, the central hub where either the quad damage or the mega health is located, and the platform hall where in the normal version of the map, the teleport item is located. You don't have to necessarily go in a merry-go-round all the time like in Quake 1, or get lost in a labyrinthic design like in Quake 2 anymore. Now, each location is distinctive, and you can branch from each location into a wider range of paths, at least if you know the map well enough. Notice how at least in deathmatch the quad damage is centered in the whole map, and you can easily maneuver yourself towards it from nearly any point of the map. If you want to get the quad damage from the room with the railgun balcony, for instance, you can either go through the short route here, or go up through the bridge to first get the rocket launcher to drop down here, or take the longer route, grab the armor, go downstairs, grab the shotgun, and then enter the central hub's pit. The map is more open-ended in that regard, and given to Quake 3's movement technology like strafe jumping or rocket jumping, you can go from one corner to the other relatively in any possible way. There's only one weird caveat though, and maybe this is a bit of a nitpick, but the heavy armor and the mega health are in the same platform hall, meaning that if you control this area very well, you can be very tanky. Although there's also quad damage in the central hub, so you have to balance that as well if you want the most advantage possible in free-for-all match. But that's not all. In my Quake extraordinaires, oh no. You know how usually like in events like QuakeCon and such there's a duel tournament where two players duel in maps like these? There's a very specific version of Q3DM6 that is adapted to this circumstance, balanced for such, and later translated into other Quake games as well similarly. Pro Q3DM6, the tourney version of Q3DM6. This time the heavy armor and the normal armor swap places, so the heavy armor is instead located in the railgun balcony long hallway, in front of the staircase that goes into the underground tunnels. And instead of quad damage, there's no quad damage, and the mega health is instead located in the central hub pit. There's a grenade launcher in the platform hall where the normal armor is, and also the lightning gun and plasma gun swap places too. This creates a more tense map control balance, whereas if you want to keep yourself tanky and dominate both the mega health and the heavy armor, you have to perfectly control the transversal between the long hallway and the central hub. And these two areas' vicinity contain the three main Quake 3 meta weapons: the rocket launcher, lightning gun, and the railgun. Of course, the caveat of this is that the platform hall where the normal armor is located is relegated to a lesser priority in terms of map control. But you can still rely on it sometimes if you want extra armor alongside the heavy armor, stacking them up, or you don't have a heavy armor and have to go for the normal armor instead. Take in mind, health without armor is pretty much subject to being an easily killable target, as if it's having armor without health. But because there's still things like armor absorption, and even some weapons can do still a lot of damage if not dodged appropriately. So being vigilant here in the central pit and the long hallway is key to surviving for the longest, in the case that you know how to dodge rockets and hit scan. This is why this version of Q3DM6, the Campgrounds, is a benchmark for the next Quake games to follow with this very map. And I draw the point of comparison here because, for one, the entries in the previous two Quake games are more of a mess, but also for two, this map has been translated to the Quake games afterwards, and it is a map that probably stands for the test of time in Quake. The Quake Life version of both Q3DM6 and Pro Q3DM6, simplified and named as Campgrounds, just adds in a few aesthetic and beginners-friendly changes into the map. Other than that, the map plays fairly similar to its Quake 3 counterpart. Albeit the map feels slightly wider, but that's maybe because I have the FOV setting nearly all the way up. The giant pentagram in the central hub is replaced, for instance, by a giant Quake symbol, maybe not to piss off more evangelical Christians that much of something. And there are also these Quake Laugh billboards plastered all over the place in case you weren't aware you're playing Quake Laugh instead, you pedantic fuck. But also a few tweaks have been made to this Quake Laugh version. This is a removal of overbounce parts that were in Quake 3 Arena. The overbounce bug was a bug in Quake 3 Arena similar to strafe jumping that was probably taken advantage of by veteran players of the game. So maybe in an effort to make Quake Laugh simpler for beginners, to remove these spots entirely. There's also the addition of edges for making beginners have an easier time landing in their jumps apparently. There are no other changes apparently in this version of the map compared to its Quake 3 counterpart, as out of the more aesthetic and beginner-friendly changes that Quake Laugh presented. Perhaps these beginner-friendly changes are probably a step forward, a tendency in the future Quake games that will probably harm the brand for a tiny bit, and you'll see eventually what I mean. Quake 4 was developed by Raven Software, famous developers of Heretic, Hex, and Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and look, they're in the Call of Duty Mines for some reason. I said this because there started to be a tendency for id Software and their publisher to outsource the development of games that were in Doom, mostly to other developers within the publisher, and not just like Quake, with also other franchises like Wolfenstein even. This is going to be a minimal problem because it seems some of these outsourced developers, like Raven, did not grasp fully what Quake was all about at some degree. Playing Quake 4's Steam version was kind of a pain in the ass to run on Windows 11 because some tweaking I had to do with the configuration and all to make it run and not look like shit. Also, the multiplayer skin roster are all in all-male roster for some reason, despite the fact that in Quake 3 and Live, there's female skins and other sorts of gender-neutral skins as well. And there was no issue there it seemed, and also because I think there are female characters in Quake 4 as well. Like, why not use those for female skins instead of whatever struck you got in there? I also think that weapons in general are just weird in the sense that the whole redesign into sci-fi versus struck type of thing that also went on with Doom 3. For some reason even, we were somehow gaslighted by id Software into thinking we like more of the struck timeline there was in Quake 2, so we got Quake 4 as a sort of continuation of that timeline. Okay, so what about the Campgrounds, or rather DM6 as we call it? Well, it's not DM6 anymore, it's Q4 DM9 for some reason, and now it's Campgrounds Redux. Oh, you'll know why they'll call it Redux, alright. What the hell? No, man, no, look at this. What did they do? Look how they massacred my boy. Oh, they seem to call it Redux because it's the size appropriate for the Crawly Wizard Gnome. No, seriously, what is this? Why? Oh. Okay, let's dissect it for a while. First of all, item placement is very important for balancing map control. That's why in the Quake 3 and Quake Live versions of the map, the heavy armor is in one place and the normal armor is in the opposite end of the map, at least in the Pro version. Now, for some reason, both are now normal armors for some reason, and I get that they both get you one-handed armor, but isn't that a compromise of map control balance? There are also these weird alcove platforms with health pickups in them, which seems like a weird addition to the map. The whole aesthetic is drawn again in a sort of brownish generic sci-fi tone with desert and rocks that pales in comparison with the gothic aesthetic of Quake 3 and Live, and that is definitely not good. But one of the most criminal offenses of this map is how tight and cramped it feels. Now they don't call it Redux for no reason, this feels miniature size. The long hallway is just shrunk entirely for no reason, and while the long hallway in Quake 3 was not obviously that big, this in Quake 4 is comparatively more tight and cramped than the Quake 3 and Live counterpart. The doorways between the central hub and the tunnels, for instance, just feel awkwardly cramped as well, and I believe the platform hall in Quake 3 was bigger than this. This generates a problem in maneuverability of the map, because most of the time you'll find yourself getting stuck and crashing into walls more than in other Quake games with the same map. Even though I can play with bots on Quake 4, thanks Raven for making me play alone in this game. But the biggest criminal offense in this map is also aesthetic. You know how in Quake 3's version there's a pentagram in the central hub or a huge Quake symbol in Quake Live? The aesthetic here is not just to make it look cool, but also indicate, at least in the deathmatch free-for-all version, that a really big power-up like the quad damage is there, and it spawns there. This distinction is important because it communicates to the player that a very important item just respawns there. It's basic game design. Now in Quake 4, this particular part of the map is nothing more than a nondescript platform, which is kinda indistinguishable from other item spawn points. No, this is like a rookie mistake made by my level designers. At least you could put on, like, I don't know, a strong emblem or something there, but this looks just so generic and bland, and doesn't particularly tell me an important item is spawning there. Is this a circular bland piece of concrete with 4 lights? Hell, the quad damage or the Mega Health in tournament version still doesn't spawning there. At least you could give me a visual indication. So the Quake version of Campgrounds Redux is absolutely criminal. Feels like a watered down version of Q3 DM6, and if I gotta be honest, at least the Lava Tomb in Quake 2 felt like it had more identity in it. This map is a Doom 3 shotgun of the Quake franchise. Quake Champions is a bit of a doozy. You can notice by now that the Quake franchise is pretty much a dying franchise, like the other Arena FPS games, relegated to somehow the minority of people who have played Quake since 1996 for some reason. Compared to Doom's franchise, especially very recently, Quake has gotten less love by id Software and Bethesda in the last years, so the important question arose: how do we make a Quake Arena FPS game that caters to the newer audiences, especially those who play Fortnite somehow, or at least those who play Overwatch? Well, the answer somehow was Quake Champions, which is a whole paradigm shift compared to other Quake games in the franchise. This one again was outsourced, this time to Saber Interactive, a reputable game developer, mind you. This means that the engine the game runs on is not id Tech. Instead, it is the Saber engine, which somehow tries to mimic a tiny bit of the id Tech engine for a tiny little bit. First of all, Quake Champions is a hero class arena FPS, so certain movement tech abilities like bunny hopping or in control are locked down behind like certain characters that you can even get with real money. For instance, bunny hopping is relegated to Soul-like for some reason, and air control is relegated to Anarchy because, get it, he has a hoverboard like in Quake 3. There are also active abilities like in Overwatch that heavily impact Quake Champions gameplay, like Range's teleportability, or Scalebearer's Bull Rush ability, or the TF2 Engineer turret, or Strock Speaker, or BJ Blazkowicz's Skunsa Kimbo. You get the idea. But there's also the fact that the game tries at least minimally to be console friendly, and these are factors to take in mind when analyzing this version of Q3 DM6, which is not called Campgrounds, it's now Blood Covenant. Oh, that's good for a death metal song made by Grandma. One of the glaring differences this version has compared to previous ones is a whole massive changes to the map's layout. For one, the platform hall is now 2 opposing big platforms, and one of them has portals to switch between the top and the bottom, aside of the bounce pad. They also added a second floor on top of the high ground around the central hub, which also connects to a long hallway and adds a second balcony next to the railgun balcony there. And third, and most importantly, a central hub pit is way smaller and more tight, although it has no items in the bottom, no quad damage or anything, nor a Mega Health. The Mega Health instead is located on a platform hall right at the opposite end, where now the quad damage and the power up is located. And the normal armor is now located in the tunnels, or what the game calls the catacombs. Even though the heavy armor remains in the same spot as it was the pro version of Q3 DM6 in Quake 3 or Quake Live, I don't exactly know why Saber Interactive, more importantly, did this. Probably it's a balancing oriented design choice, but this creates a glaring problem in terms of map control. Instead of being able to control the heavy armor and the Mega Health rooms one next to the other, now you got to traverse the whole length of the map to get both, which obviously takes longer to traverse. And also when it comes to, say, the quad damage, now that it's not on the central hub and instead it's on a platform hull on the opposing platform to the mega health, you don't only have the problem that central hub loses importance, but also have the problem that a player in deathmatch free-for-all can both acquire the mega health and quad damage at the same time, which can obviously turn them into an unstoppable death machine. It's also important to note a certain particularity in Quake Champions that differs from, say, Quake 3 Arena or Quake Live. Some characters in Quake Champions feel tankier than the players in Quake 3 or Live. Maybe that's why they place a mega health in Quake Champions that way, I don't know. But it somehow makes the gameplay slower to play through because some characters can take more shots, especially from rockets and rails, in Quake Champions compared to previous games. You know how in Quake 3 and Quake Live I did offline bot test matches to see how this map plays? I did the same in Quake Champions against a Death Knight bot with my Sorlag, and after having to connect to the matchmaking process for a while, it felt like Death Knight was tougher to kill than any player in Quake Champions, especially after he might have got both the heavy armor and the mega health a couple times. So basically it kind of felt like rockets and rails, they just tickle him sometimes. These home design changes that make the Quake franchise more palatable to beginners is probably one of the reasons why Quake and the rest of the Arena FPS franchise are dwindling in player base. Quake and other Arena FPS games are really hard to master and have a really high skill ceiling compared to other games like Fortnite or Overwatch. It's a too little too late type of situation considering the Quake franchise has got way less love than, say, Doom, except for a couple remasters we got of Quake 1 and 2. This begs a question that many Quake players have been asking by the end of this. Do we need Quake 6? Short answer, no. Here's a long answer. I think it might be more appropriate if instead of abandoning all previous Quake games and making new ones out of nowhere, we actually help maintain and take care of all the prior Quake games. Quake 3 Live and Quake Champions have dying player bases for a reason, and Quake Champions will receive proper updates or new content to justify playing it. There's also the fact that Quake Live, for instance, has little to no accessibility options, not just for new learning players, but also for players with disabilities, because let's face it, trying to aim decently the railgun in this game, especially as a neurodivergent person, is an Herculean task. Maybe we should probably focus on not just adding accessibility features, which include, and this might be contentious to say, aim assist.
Fuck it! I'm so sick and tired, man. Listen, Timmy. I'm telling you right now, I'm so sick and tired of this fucking cheesy ass aim assist crossplay.
Which should not just be an optional feature, but also immensely helps people who cannot help themselves trying to aim properly and compete with normal players despite their physical limitations. We also need to add better and more learning resources, especially for people who have a harder time trying to master this game. Especially on games like Quake Live, where the skill ceiling is way higher than, say, Quake Champions. These games need a proper revival, and not just the usual gatekeeping that goes on with this genre, because what's going also here is that the Arena FPS genre is like the fighting game community of FPS games. The main players of these games are actively gatekeeping new players away because of some false sense of nostalgia or because of a semi-good discourse that permeates the hardcore gamer section of the gamer community. Just let people have fun with Quake. That's it. Anyway, I hope you did learn something new from this video, whether for how long or trivial it might be. Like this video, give it a like this channel, subscribe, and want to financially keep us the lights on? Become a Goon today. Smell you later, Gator.